Welcome everybody to this part of the Asia Matters virtual China-Ireland Business Summit. My name is David Marr and I'm head of Food and Agri Group in KPMG Ireland. I'm joined this evening by my colleague Ian Proudfoot. Ian is KPMG's Global Head of Food and Agri and based in New Zealand. Ian will be very familiar with many of you. He's a frequent visitor to Ireland and I'm sure many of you have heard him speak. He's one of the world's leading commentators on the future of food and agri globally. And even though Ian and I are separated by 11 time zones and around 18,000 kilometers, we're going to have a nice cozy fireside chat on the topic, adapting agri-food for a post-COVID world. Ian, you're very welcome. You're familiar with the Farmers Journal KPMG report that we published last May. And in fact, you were kind enough to contribute an article, in fact, in relation to sustainability in New Zealand. And the title of our report was Sustainability 2050. How to meet our 2050 sustainability targets while feeding 10 billion people. And the impression that we had, Ian, both when we were preparing the report and in relation to the feedback that we got afterwards, was that Irish agri-food industry is very much on the cusp of really significant developments in the sustainability area. Would you share this view, Ian, and is that what you're seeing at a global level?
I think, when you look globally, sustainability is becoming more and more important to consumers that have specific interest in how food is produced. So, the report that was produced earlier this year talking about Ireland is incredibly consistent with reports that are being produced here in New Zealand, coming out of Australia. I know I've been having a lot of conversations with our teams in Canada, and they're talking around exactly the same themes as well. So if you look at what the challenge is how do we feed the world better, more nutritious, more sustainable food, and do that while using less of the world's resources? For a lot of countries, that is the key challenge facing the industry. So, what does that mean? What are we seeing people work with in terms of the dynamics? Well, we're seeing real investment now into innovation. This is something that I've been talking about for a number of years, this concept of the global agrarian revolution, this digitization of agriculture so that you can use AI and robotics and a whole range of new solutions to actually find a better way of doing things is really starting to accelerate. But I think there is a real opportunity for an organization to set a vision of what sustainability looks like for it, to determine what its purpose is to exist, to measure that in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in terms of what they want to achieve, and then actually set about actually making some sort of difference and really being about producing good, healthy, nutritious, sustainable food. And the more companies we're talking to around the world, that is really the core of what the CEO and the strategy team are starting to think about.
Yeah, and it seems that it's being driven from a number of different directions, to your point. I mean, in the EU, for example, we see the Green Deal. In Ireland, we see nearly everything being run through a sustainability/environmental lens before government will commit to any projects. And then, of course, you have consumers who are pressing continually around sustainability and wanting to know the provenance and source of their food, as you say.
Yeah, definitely. We're looking very closely at that Green Deal that the EU have issued in terms of its 27-point plan. With New Zealand just released something called Fit for a Better World, which is about how we do agriculture in a balanced way, what we're calling te taiao, the Maori concept of balancing air, land, water, and people, so balancing all living things. Therefore the sort of structure of that Green Deal is now saying, well, do we need a national food strategy that sort of takes a similar sort of approach and puts at the core producing sustainable food to feed people in a sustainable way? It's interesting. I was in a session as well with Zach Goldsmith, the Minister for Environment and also Minister for the Pacific out of the UK, and he's talking about exactly the same things in relation to post-Brexit Britain. So, from Ireland's perspective, your key markets also on the same track.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the other features that we've seen, and I know you and I have discussed this previously, is the amount of investment funds, the global big investment funds that are now starting to focus on agribusiness that maybe they didn't before. And it plays to this point that you made earlier in terms of the digitization of agriculture and the catch up there. I mean, is that sustaining over the last number of months? Is it slightly on pause? Do you see it returning in the future, in the near future?
Well, it's interesting because I think, what we are seeing is this whole COVID scenario has forced people to think a lot more about purpose. And, the recent KPMG CEO survey that we've done globally really highlighted how CEOs have become more focused on the purpose of their organizations. And that ties with what we're seeing from an investment perspective, where investors are now wanting to make sure they're not just investing on a return basis, but they also want to invest with some degree of impact. That is attracting people to agricultural investments because there is that ability to have impact in the agriculture sector. So, where I'm sitting at the moment, I'm seeing more organizations recognizing that investment into long-term agricultural assets provides, a nice hedge to much else going on in society. What we've seen through the last 6 to 8 months is people have become more connected with food. They recognize where their food's coming from, and that if anything, the role of food in society has become more important rather than less. And I think that is attracting more investors to assets. So, interestingly, we're not seeing a significant drop off in deal volume. We're not seeing any slowdown in inquiry coming from international funds looking to invest. And I think more importantly, we are seeing people, though, saying, well, actually, what we do want to invest in as a business is doing the right thing. We're not looking nowadays for turnaround, but we're looking for businesses where we can build on somebody that already has a clear vision of what their environmental strategy is, a clear vision of how they look after their people, and, a clear vision of how they're going to produce nutritious food.
Yeah. And in terms of food assurance there, which you referred to, just give us a sense of that in terms of the developments. I mean, I think, many people would think that that's really where an awful lot of the technological weight will come in terms of tracking and tracing of food. Just give us a sense as to where things are globally there, or what you expect to see over the coming years.
I'll never ever forget my first trip that I had to Shanghai. And on my first day, we got taken around some supermarkets. And one of the first things they took us to in a big Carrefour hypermarket was into the lab to see the products being tested to confirm that it actually said it was what was on the packet. And, that's fundamentally what it's about, particularly if you're thinking about Asian markets. There is a real concern as to whether what's in the packet is actually what it says it is. And therefore, we are seeing people not necessarily wanting to use, but wanting to know that the provenance information that is associated with a product is available to them if they want to see it. So that is driving us down a track of digital signaling, whether it's blockchain or some other form of digital communication that goes right the way back from the input providers into the farm all the way to the final consumer, so they can find out the whole provenance story of the product. But, I think one of the things we've found, things like blockchain, people are concerned about blockchain because, all blockchain does is it records what's been put into the supply chain and tracks it all the way through. So if you put rubbish in at one end, you get rubbish out the other end. So I think what we're also seeing is people want to ensure that there is provenance verification around key attributes of a product. So if you're saying something's organic, somebody's actually verified it to confirm it is organic. So, that's something where there's a lot of organizations globally that have capability to provide that sort of provenance based on what their specialism is. So for me, what we're talking to clients about and what companies around the world are saying they're interested in is how can we actually ensure that everything we do in our supply chain to verify every point or that's important, the security of the product, actually gets to be available to the consumer. So should they at the point of sale decide to scan the product, they can access all that information and get the comfort before they pick the product off and buy it. And if you walk around a supermarket in Shanghai or Guangzhou, that's what you're going to see. You are going to see people scanning products and getting that sort of information. And I think therefore investing in those information technology systems to enable that, but then also investing in the provenance to be able to confirm the signals you're sending are accurate and factual is really important.
Be backed up, absolutely. Are you seeing then the concept, Ian, of kind of specific food for specific reasons or specific people, in terms of elderly people, people with, various deficiencies, etc. And are those growth markets, or are they all, niche markets that really it's going to be very difficult for those to actually, develop sustainably over time?
So we are definitely seeing a breakup of the one size fits all model. And, I used to talk about our dairy industry here in New Zealand. It was one size fits a billion because we produced one product and it was sold to everybody. We're now moving to one size fits one, and that you're getting much more customer specific in terms of how solutions are done. And we're not there yet. But that's the track that we're heading towards. And that is about producing products for actually now relatively small niches. But if you're going to maximize the value of what you're doing, you can't sell it to everybody. You've got to target it towards the customers that have the desire. So, if that's older people in our society, then they have specific food needs. If it's people with chronic health conditions, then they're going to have a range of specific needs. We're definitely seeing a whole group of new consumers, particularly young consumers, that are suddenly interested in their health for the first time ever in their lives. And they want to know if something's going to boost their immunity system. So you've got to target the product and the story and the science to verify the product does benefit the immunity system towards the particular niche that you're looking at. So, I think where I've sort of moved to is China as a market is not one market. China's not even a market where you can break it down by Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, or individual cities. China is a market of 1 million different niches. And to be successful, you may only need to be good in 10 of those niches, but you've got to find them and target them incredibly carefully. And that means you've got to use social media to get to the people you need to talk to. You've got to design your supply chain so you get to the right people. And then you've got to have the solution they need or want. And that's about the provenance story, but it's also about the functional properties of the product. So that becomes important as well.
Yeah. You mentioned Asia there, and clearly on this seminar, there's a lot of Irish companies doing business in Asia, but a lot of Asian businesses as well. Just give us a sense of any differences you're seeing, different trends you're seeing in Asia vis-a-vis the rest of the world.
Yeah, so it's interesting. At the moment, there are two Asias. There's China, and then there's the rest of Southeast Asia, and then obviously there's India, which is in a very different position as well. But if you're thinking specifically about China, and I don't know how accurate the data we're seeing is, but China is ahead in the recovery from COVID. So what it is doing is it's already sending out signals around how the world will start to shape up post the COVID downturn. And what we are seeing is the way people are eating has changed. So the traditional idea of the banquet with the table, the lazy Susan in the middle of the table, and that's something that's just not happening at the moment. So, rather than food being put in the middle of the table, people are given a checklist and then the food's brought to them on a plate. Buffets are definitely not as common. People are eating out less, and people are looking at eating in home more, which, is causing some shift in the way people live in China, because apartments have been built on the basis that people will eat out a lot. So, those changes are coming. And also, I think what we're seeing is particularly the Chinese market is really sort of at the moment shaping or defining what the international market looks like. And I think, that's probably because they are open, they are buying the products that they want. We're seeing prices have got some resistance and are holding up. Products that are not important to them at the moment, the prices in those segments are starting to drop off because the food service demand from everywhere else in the world is still so low. So China is absolutely central to how the global food system is going to play out over the next 12 months or so. And a second wave in China that could have fundamental impacts on exporters.
Yeah, well, let's keep the fingers crossed in relation to that one. I think that's probably a good note to finish on, the fact that, COVID-19 will clearly drive change, and wouldn't it be great if it drove change for the better at a wider global level?
I think, my reference to COVID is it's a great accelerator. It's, it's going to change our world in ways that even now, we have no concept of what next year might look like, and that's exciting.
Yeah, change is good, as they say. Ian, thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time. Look forward to seeing you again, and thanks again on behalf of everybody who's participating in the seminar today for sharing your thoughts and insights with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, David.
And welcome everyone to our opening session this morning. And from the outset, our thanks go to Ian Proudfoot of KPMG for setting the scene and for presenting such invaluable insights into adapting agri-food to a post-COVID world, the title of our opening session this morning. Our thanks also to David Maher, who's joined us on the panel this morning. And we had just heard Ian speak about the growing importance of sustainability and how it's finding expression in almost everywhere we look, in Europe's new Green Deal, in the digitization of agriculture, in how it is providing purpose to businesses seeking to make an impact and make a difference, its role in society, its growing importance to consumers, consumers who are concerned about the interaction between food and the environment, how food is produced, its provenance, and its impact on our health, and in today's COVID world, how it might help boost our immunity. We also heard Ian speak about the central role increasingly being played by China. He described it as not just one niches, and where, as he said, it may be just sufficient to target just 10, but to target very carefully and to recognize the importance of social media. And Ian concluded by drawing our attention to the fact that China is ahead in terms of COVID recovery, and short of it experiencing a second wave, it will be very important to observe how the signals Chinese consumers are sending as cues to us in terms of how global food issues may evolve in a post-COVID world. So there's much to debate there this morning, and I'm joined by 5 excellent panelists, the first of whom I have to apologize, we don't have on video, but he's on audio, and it's Brittany Carpenter, who's head of international trade at the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. And I would like you, Brittany, if you can still hear us, to perhaps paint a picture of the policy backdrop within which the agri-food sector is operating right now. I understand the Common Agricultural Policy is effectively on hold for 2 years, but the Green Deal is there.
Yes, good morning, Aidan, and good morning, or afternoon, or evening to all those tuning in. I think on Common Agricultural Policy, the current presidency of the European Union, the German presidency, are actually quite hopeful of getting an agreement amongst ministers next month at the Council. The way the European legislative system works is that Commission make a proposal, and then the Council of the European Union, which is the member states' ministers, and separately the directly elected members of the European Parliament, both separately try to come to a common position between themselves, and then go into basically a bartering system to see what it'll look like in the end. One of the things that's delayed it so far is the CAP budget. The multi-annual financial framework has only recently been agreed by heads of state and government. But now that we have that, we can now get down to doing the nitty-gritty of agreeing this CAP reform. The overall context, of course, of the CAP reform and COVID is that, particularly for Ireland, where it's an existential issue for the agri-food sector, we have Brexit, which has implications not just for Ireland, but if there is, for example, a no-deal scenario, which no sensible person could rule out, we have been preparing on the basis of no deal on worst-case scenario. And even indeed, if there is a minimum tariff and quota-free free trade agreement, the non-tariff costs, for example, customs declarations, and possible delays in transportation by road of Irish goods, which after all, remember, for others out there, Ireland is a small island, off the coast of Western Europe. So we have practical issues regarding access to our biggest market, the European Union. So it's very much a fluid situation, and against a geopolitical situation, international trade generally, where we have tensions now being manifested through increased protectionism and unilateralism. Unfortunately, the WTO, and I spent 6 years at the WTO, is no longer the go-to place and has not indeed been for international trade since around about 2008. And that is unfortunate. I mean, you know, the scene, it has been people turning away from multilateralism. And again, within Europe, we've got a growing concern amongst our public that trade must take account of sustainability, which is what underpins the European Green Deal. I mean, the European Green Deal, in my opinion, is now shorthand for future EU economic policy.
Okay, very good. You paint quite a complex picture for exporters to have to deal with in the period ahead. Just a further question, building on your remarks in regard to Brexit. How well positioned do you think we are to deal with a hard Brexit in terms of diversification into markets around Asia and into China, for example?
Well, before, I mean, you know, bear in mind, Ireland and the Department of Agriculture had a Brexit preparation team in place before the British, because we assumed the worst case scenario. And the difficulty for many of our partners in EU, the closer you are to Britain, the United Kingdom, the more business you do. We have fully understood, and we have been working very hard to reduce our reliance on the UK market. And indeed, our sales to the UK last year, our trade with the UK, fell. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when trade with the UK was 70%. It's now below 35% and falling, because there are implications, as I reminded my colleagues in Europe in recent years, of this for everybody. Because if Irish product, because of tariffs in agri-food, which, you know, historically are multiples of what they are in non-agricultural goods, multiples. If Irish product has to find a new home, some of that will have to be within the European Union simply because of proximity. But we are working hard at developing other markets. For example, China last year was our 5th largest export market for agri-food. And indeed, in Q1 of this year, that had gone up to 4th largest. We have a difficulty at the moment on beef, but we hope that is just a short-term difficulty, and we are working very hard at political and diplomatic levels to resolve that issue.
Okay, very good, Breffney. Thank you for that. Which brings us on perhaps to Ailish Ford, who is the Global Business Development Director with Borbia, because you've been working hard, Ailish, for quite a number of years now in preparing for a build-up in terms of diversification further into Asia and into China in particular. It must have been very difficult over the past 6 to 9 months to maintain relationships in China. How have your diversification programs worked in the difficult environment of travel restrictions over that period?
Thank you, Aidan. Good morning or afternoon or evening to everybody. Yes, indeed, and because at the core of our strategy with market diversification, and particularly on how we engage in China, it's very much about building our partnerships there. And of course, the best way to do that is to do that face to face. So with the pandemic, we had to really adapt everything we were doing to the virtual world. Now, what I would say in China is that at least China, as many people tuning in today will know, is very much advanced in terms of the digital world. So that made it easier. So instead of meeting people face to face, we were doing that virtually, where we were meeting with customers. We would use WeChat a lot, for example. So it's become, you know, our savior in that sense of keeping up those relationships. Also, I would say in terms of our customers, we really work with our customers to face the challenge together. So to provide a solution for them by working together. So we know that during the pandemic, e-commerce has been booming. So in China, we've worked really hard with our customers to have e-commerce promotions on seafood, on meat. And what I would say as well, and it sort of echoes what Ian was saying there in the keynote, is that what we are seeing in China now, that it's the only one of our markets where we're beginning now to see a normal business life resuming. So our team in China have attended 22 events physically since June. We are physically there at trade shows now. So we have been at 2 trade shows in the past 3 weeks, Seafood in Shanghai and CIMI. And we're going to be at Cial in Shanghai next week. And I think that is really positive. So that is how we have been maintaining those partnerships. And of course, it's not just with our customers, it's with all of our stakeholders. And as Breffney was saying there, that whole government to government piece is so important, and so important for things like market access. And Breffney mentioned we're having some difficulties there. But, you know, we will resolve that by that close relationship that we do have. And that's really important if we're to keep the momentum of our business relationships in China.
Eilish, thank you for that. I know also that you put a lot of emphasis on understanding consumers and undertake quite a lot of research with consumers on the ground. What are you hearing from China in terms of how Chinese consumers are adapting in the world in which they have found themselves? And are there any cues that we might extend into other geographies beyond that?
That's very interesting, Aidan, and I should say that I'm really pleased to say that we opened our thinking house in Shanghai in the last couple of weeks. So that's really important. And for those who are familiar with our thinking house in Dublin, you will know that that's the centre of insight for us. And this is going to mean that we are going to have that very deep insight now into the Chinese market and to the Chinese consumer. So one of the things that we did focus on with COVID was our Thinking House team in Dublin did a global research project on looking at the indicators, trying to see what they were indicating in terms of consumer behaviour, how that might be changing. And we're following up on that right now, in fact, by doing one specifically on China. But even in the global one, we can see what those initial indicators of consumer behaviour change might be, and some of that particular to China as well. One of them, again, Ian mentioned in his keynote there, and we are certainly finding it, is that there's a much bigger consumer awareness of protection, of shielding themselves, both inside and out. And of course, from a food perspective, that means a much greater emphasis on functional foods. So consumers in China and elsewhere, very concerned about their immunity and in building their immunity. And so for food manufacturers, I think that's really important, because it means that from an innovation point of view, we know that that is an area that consumers are very concerned about. And it goes to, you know, areas like vitamin D, for example, but also we're finding things like protection of the eyes, because I think all of us will know that we're all using our screens a lot more. And so, you know, consumers are aware of that. The other indicator that I find very telling that we're finding is the return to cooking and baking. So in China, for example, at the height of the pandemic, about a third of Chinese consumers said that they had now taken to cooking and baking in their homes. And in fact, also at the height of the pandemic, over 80% of Chinese consumers said that they would see in future that they would be eating at home a lot more. So we're also seeing that whole phenomenon of the eating in being the new eating out, if you like, and we're seeing that in China as well. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the China-specific research we're doing is going to show us. Because for us, China is, you know, it's the one market that we can see that more than any other market is coming out of COVID. So for that reason, as you said, Aidan, it's going to give us a lot of pointers as to what the rest of the world might look like.
Thank you, Eilish. David, the now normal future, I think, is how you describe it in the latest May Global Agri report published by KPMG. And I think much of what Eilish has been saying and what Ian has been saying indeed are very much aligned. How has that report you published, I think last May, impacted your work in Ireland?
Thanks, Aidan, and good morning, afternoon and evening to everybody. Yeah, I think we do this report, as you'll be familiar at this stage, with the Farmers Journal. We've done it now for 8 or 10 years. I think the happenstance of the material in that report, which had always been pulled together for a number of months previously, was pretty remarkable. Timing-wise, it was published the day after, I think, the EU Green Deal was published. Quite apart from that, I think, all of the feedback we've been getting, both in terms of preparing for the report and also in terms of, the commentary we would have received afterwards and the feedback we would have received afterwards, is that it really is hitting the spot, so to speak. We're definitely seeing now that that whole area of sustainability, decarbonisation is very much coming to the fore. I had concerns, and I discussed it with Ian, as to whether the advent of COVID meant that people would just take the foot off that particular pedal and say, look, we don't have the funds now to invest in sustainability. We just are trying to keep the business alive. But really what we're seeing is that people are obviously kind of struggling with COVID, but as soon as they're bouncing back with a sustainability lens. I think it goes back a lot to what Eilish said there, in terms of people are very, very focused now in terms of the food, the provenance of the food, the supply chain of the food, being very, very comfortable with where it comes from, being very comfortable with what it is doing to them as they consume it. And we really do see now that the companies are focusing on that much more. Ian made the point that CEOs, the strategy groups in companies now, and major global companies that we see, both Ireland and globally, are very much focused on that. And I think, Ian used the phrase COVID as a disruptor. I think it'll disrupt in this way as well. I think that we'll see an awful lot more focus on the whole coming together of food and pharma, and I mean pharma in terms of delivery of functional foods more than anything else. So yes, in a very long-winded way of answering the question, but we're certainly seeing that there's a very significant drive now to improvement in the quality of food, how is it delivered, and the provenance of it.
Okay, I'll come back to you again, but Jason, picking up on the sustainability message there, you haven't taken your foot off the accelerator at all, I understand, in terms of your commitment to sustainability, and you're not without significant ambition for the future.
Yeah, Aidan, hello everyone. Look, absolutely. I mean, I think, here at Carberry, and look, indeed across the Irish dairy industry, look, we've tried to remain proactive and really engage on our sustainability platform. And really, we think about that, Aidan, that starts right in the field. I mean, it starts with our farms, starts with our grass, how we manage that, and right through then everything from farmer operations to processing facilities, and right through getting product into market. And look, a specific area that we've started working on here in Carberry Group is we've a new project. It's called Farm Zero C, which is the intent of getting data and proving that it's possible to have a zero carbon dairy footprint. Now, that's a long-term project. It's very ambitious, and it will take a lot of effort, but that's the type of commitment that we're looking at. And so we take that, as I said, and break it down across every aspect of our supply chain in terms of delivering against sustainability. I mean, we certainly see, and we've worked with some of Eilish's colleagues and others in terms of looking at the market in China and in Asia. And certainly, I think there absolutely is an appreciation for sustainability and having a better footprint. So look, we're all about making sure that we deliver against that, but also that we communicate it and communicate it well in terms of what we're doing well and things that we need to do as we move forward. So look, that's absolutely it, and we're wholeheartedly committed to that.
Very good. Now, just moving on to Professor Song Miao, you have a unique perspective because of your integral understanding of the Chinese market, of Chinese consumers, your understanding of the Irish agri-food industry, and of course, your role in technology operating in the Dairy Research Centre in Moore Park with Teagasc. Given what we've been witnessing over the past 9 months, and what we've heard a number of the panelists speak about in regard to health attributes, immunity, the importance of boosting immunity in a COVID world, how has COVID affected your work in Teagasc?
Actually, yes, thanks, Alan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Yeah, globally. Actually, yes. In trucks here, as I mentioned, we did have some impact from the COVID-19, yeah. But from the trucks, because we are the organization, we offer the service in terms of advisory, education, and also research. Over the last few months, we did adjust as possible as we can to fit into the new normal we call, yeah. In terms of getting back to work, how this impact our work, I would say, first they impact the way of working, have been affected. So that's why now everything seems to be moved to the virtual, online. That's the way of working. And in terms of our service to the farm, to the industry, we have developed some more e-learning program. At least we try to minimize the impact of COVID as possible as we can. And at the same time, the context of the work has also been changed. Some of our projects we have been tuning to fit in to minimize the impacts. I give you just one example of some of our food programs. For example, we are looking at how the impact of COVID-19 on the consumer, on the people's cooking way, so on, so that we can get good advice for our food industry or for our farm, give them more advice on this aspect. This is to just give you one example. Another example is something like, for example, like we have a bioscience department. There, we also set up something like a Irish COVID-19 sequencing consortium. We are participating in this one so that we can get an understanding how this COVID-19 impact on the whole community within the island, so that we can develop more strategic way so that we can serve for to minimize the impact. This is from the science point. We are already on the way try to get our great effort to minimize those impacts. So this is the work in Charles we are doing. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, it seems like it's been a very busy time, maybe even busier than had we not been experiencing the kind of difficulties that we have been, and perhaps that's the story of the day. Jason, coming back to you in regard to your focus on the Asian region, you have been quite busy in recent times as well in extending your presence through Synergy Flavors in Thailand, and you have opened a facility, I understand, in Jakarta in Indonesia. Can you tell us about your focus on Asia and how that might extend ultimately into China?
Yeah, sure, Aidan. Look, we've been doing business in Asia now for close to 15 years. We've had a physical production facility, to your point, in Bangkok now for 10 years. So look, we've had a long-standing presence and interest in the Asian market. As you said, we've extended that to Jakarta. Now we have an office in Shanghai as well, where we've got both commercial and technical folks. And I guess that the key point really there that we've learned in Asia, and it goes back to maybe some of the points that Ian made earlier, and even some of Alicia's points as well around, what we understand is that your offering in Asia, be it on our flavor side or our cheese side or our nutrition side, is that it has to be customized to the local tastes and the local needs. So needs sometimes can be a different format. So, some customers can handle big blocks or big bags, and others it has to be small, and it can be refrigerated, it can't be refrigerated, etc. So it's really important that we have those in-market or focus market areas, that we've got people on the ground that can work very closely with our customers to understand their needs, as well as to translate what we see as the consumer trends, and to bring, again, that taste and functionality that will make sense for those specific markets. So we've started now in the last couple of years. Look, we really started, I guess, as a consequence of Brexit, where we felt on our cheese side we absolutely had to diversify, and we saw the Chinese market as being a key market moving forward. And so we have a team, as I said, both commercial that can support customers, but also technical, that actually work on product development And again, back to maybe Ian's point, we are focused on niches. We're not, with all due respect, we're not Fonterra. We're not going to drive large volumes of commodity product. We're very much focused on value-added ingredients across, again, our nutrition, cheese, and taste businesses.
Very good. David, at the end of that piece, and again, going back to Ian, he described COVID as a great accelerator. How have companies been responding generally in terms of your clients? Jason clearly has a very structured approach and has a certain deliberate, systematic presence in the region and a clear plan. Is that something that would be typical in terms of how your clients are working towards developing the region and the Chinese market in particular?
It is, Aidan, yeah. And I think some of the consistent themes that we're seeing this morning are probably, number one, the whole concept of niches, as Ian mentioned it, as Jason has emphasized there, in terms of that's how Carberry, I suppose, has built success, by not trying to be a kind of a one-size-fits-all, but going after very specific markets. And we see that with all our clients, and we actually see it across industries as well. It's not just in the food and agri industry. We see it in various other industries, including, leasing, manufacturing, education, etc. So the whole concept of the need, if you like, to break Asia down and break China specifically down into a number of sub-markets is absolutely critical. I think the other thing we're seeing is that China has bounced back earlier than others. Eilish mentioned this, and she's absolutely right. We're seeing that we're seeing the travel is up, we're seeing activity is up, we're seeing movement generally in China is up. So that gives an opportunity for businesses to, get stuck in, so to speak, and really move that forward. And I think that's come as a welcome relief almost to Irish businesses where, they're struggling generally with their product, with their markets, be it their domestic market, be it the UK, be it the EU, and to have some level of light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, in terms of China opening up is very, very beneficial. So I think, companies are focusing their efforts more on China. They always were focused on China, given the vastness of that market. But I think now that it's opened up and that it's ahead of the rest of the world markets, really means that it gives an opportunity for Irish companies to really kind of, double down, so to speak, and push forward in relation to the Chinese market. And that's certainly what we're seeing. It goes back to the point a little bit around, travel is restricted in the sense that, we Irish people, if they're flying from here, can't go to China. But social media is much more advanced in China than it is in many other of the markets that Irish companies would sell into. And really, companies are having to take advantage of that and push forward in relation to that.
Eilish, you described earlier how eating in is the new eating out. There was a time when eating out was a new eating in. The world has been turned on its head in a fashion. And I suppose what many people are wondering is how permanent might this changing world be? How entrenched are new behaviours likely to become?
And I think that's a really interesting point, Aidan. And that work I was mentioning, the global work that we did, was trying to pinpoint that. Now, obviously, you have to take that in phases. So what we did with our research was we looked at it at the height of the pandemic, essentially, and now we're going back in to see which of those behaviours are sticking. But I think there are some indicators that can help us to try to understand that. And I think for consumers, what this pandemic has really brought out is that feeling of safety, and for them, why safety is so important, and that comfort of knowing that you and your family and your loved ones are safe in whatever manner you might translate that as being. So I mentioned the cooking at home, and the cooking at home isn't just about the safety and being sure of what you have and that whole issue of traceability and sustainability. It's also about that comfort feeling, perhaps going back to your childhood feelings of comfort. But I do think that what is going to remain with us is that increased awareness from consumers as to safety, as to traceability, as to sustainability, as Ian was talking about there. And I think in Ireland, and for Irish food and drink producers, that is really playing to our strengths, because I think that we are recognised the world over for our very high standards of safety. for all the work we've done on sustainability. If I might mention the Burbia Origin Green Programme, which really is the only national sustainability programme. And I think that gives a lot of confidence to our consumers and to our customers all around the world that we have very strong systems in terms of traceability, in terms of having those proof points so that consumers know that the products that are coming from Ireland are safe and that they're sustainable and that they're helping us in terms of building that very sustainable world, that we are minimizing any effect to the environment and really managing our carbon footprint. So for markets like China, I think it's really important that we understand that if you're importing products that can show that they're safe and sustainable, you're also helping to reduce your own carbon footprint.
Thank you for that, Eilish. And Professor Song, I saw you nodding your head while Eilish was speaking there. The issue of food safety has always been to the forefront in the Chinese market. How do you see COVID has affecting consumers' concerns or understanding in terms of food safety? Has it propelled it even further to the fore, or have there been new issues coming through?
Exactly, as Eilish mentioned already very clearly, that the consumer trends have been changed after the COVID years. As a food scientist myself, I do have some points on this discuss. First, as we know, the food safety and product sourcing visibility are becoming more important for the Chinese consumer, because the Chinese consumer, they are keen to aware of the importance of the strict hygiene and food safety. So some technology like a blockchain in the supply chain is very critical. Yeah. So this is becoming more and more critical because consumers need to know what the experience, the sourcing process of the products. A few days ago, I read one report. They mentioned now most of the Chinese consumers, they said they are now more rational in their purchase. They would prefer to take longer time to putting through more detail and looking at what on their shopping list. So this type of food safety awareness is really becoming more a hot topic or concept across the whole different food category. And this also affect the consumer behavior and also the purchasing behavior as well. And in terms of food supporting awareness and immunity, these are also now becoming the same priority as food safety as well. So the consumer are more demanding for the premium products, and also one interesting point, they are now more fun to the reliable brand. So all this like consumer change have been that open a new opportunity for the food industry as well.
Very good. And picking up on that issue once more, one of our participants to the conference this morning has sent in some questions. Madam Yulo, who has been in contact with us of the Chamber of China Food Chamber in Beijing. She has two questions, and maybe Brittany, through a regulatory lens, you may be able to cast some light in terms of the answers to this. The first one is, how did the pandemic impact the Irish meat producers regarding butchering, producing, and export capacity? So the pandemic impact on the meat sector. And then how do Irish food companies ensure food safety during the epidemic and to secure that food exported is not contaminated by the novel coronavirus?
Well, with food, our approach always is to test. Now, not only are we having to test the food, we're having to test producers of the food in the factories, because meat factories are labor-intensive places, but we have a comprehensive testing program for the people working in those factories. So there were outbreaks, yes, indeed there were. And when the outbreaks occurred, we took action and we said, okay, you're closing. So we now test everybody going into a factory, because We will not risk our reputation internationally by cutting any corners on this issue. And the industry is aware of that. Hello?
Okay, Breffney, I'm not sure if there's some interruption on the line there. There have been pauses. But let's move on and come back to you, David. Another query that has come in to us from our participants is regarding routes to market that Ian touched on. For Irish food producers who believe they have product to meet consumer needs, how do they reach out to consumers in China, and how has this changed post-COVID? Have you been having communications with your clients in this respect?
We obviously work closely with our Chinese colleagues, KPMG in China. And I suppose one of the things that we are seeing, as I mentioned earlier on, is that social media is now really the driver or the gateway, if I can call it that, in relation to opening up supply chains into China. We would always advocate in terms of food products that, you know, companies need to think very carefully through their market. Who are they trying to target? How are they trying to target them? Eilish and Borbia are particularly strong in this area, so we would always recommend to our clients to touch base with Borbia and understand the local market that they're trying to target. Because as has been mentioned in a number of occasions, China is a whole world of different markets. Jason gave some of the very relevant points there in terms of large bags versus small bags, refrigerated versus non-refrigerated, etc. So in terms of pushing product through to the Chinese market, it's not as simple as sort of saying, well, we'll make sales to China. So there's a whole program, I would say, to go through in terms of market research, in terms of targeting customers, in terms of how do you get to those customers, in terms of trying to build the supply chain. So yeah, we're seeing it, and I think it goes back, as I said earlier on, to the fact that the supply chain, that social media is much stronger in China than elsewhere, and that's really the way people go through.
Very good. Jason, as the practitioner in this, the successful practitioner who has put the theory into practice and successfully so, you are to be congratulated, I understand, right now, because you are launching, or you have just launched, a new Carberry dairy brand with a particular focus, I understand, in the Asian region. Could you tell us about that?
Sure, Aidan. Look, I mean, our Carberry dairy brand, as you just referred to, we've just launched that. And really, our Carberry dairy brand is focused on our cheese portfolio. And the intent really, Aidan, is it's a communication tool. It's got a few, objectives really, sitting back. The first is really about telling that farm to fork story, be it, again, back to where do we start on a farm with grass management, right through to collection, right through to how do we create new formulas, how do we process the cheese, how does it mature, how do we take it then from a warehouse effectively in Ireland and ship it over to Asia in this instance, and then how do we explain to chefs and to other customers how the products work best, and ultimately that drives the consumer acceptance and the success of the product in the marketplace. So it's a tool to explain how we do everything, but also for our customers to better understand and better use our products in the marketplace. And maybe just back to a couple of points made earlier, I think it's also important in terms of the narrative around food safety and provenance. So it does tell all of that story of, okay, cheese just doesn't show up in a bag or a block somewhere. But again, right back to how do we track it? How do we manage it? How do we ensure that we've got a robust supply chain? How do we ensure that we've got safe processes to ensure that the product is safe, is reliable from a quality perspective each and every time? And really, that they're the pieces of our dairy brand. And as you said, it's launched on a global basis, but very much what we are doing is customizing our messaging specifically in Asia, specifically in China, where we've got materials, marketing materials, product information, that's in Chinese. It's customized to the various customers in China, but beyond that, into those niches. Again, a food service customer versus an ingredients customer, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really it's less about just creating a brand for the sake of creating a brand and feeling good about it. It's really about delivering a message and explaining and reassuring our customers.
Jason, how do you approach a world that is being disrupted in so many ways, and where, as we've heard, this issue of eating out or eating in, the future of the food service sector, will it grow or will it continue to expand as we had always been anticipating? And yet, if you're targeting a food service sector, what commitment does one make at this time?
Yeah, look, we would say we still see, and particularly again, our focus is on the premium experiences, be that at home or be that, you know, in terms of what consumers are buying, but in the food service environment as well. And particularly, I guess, you know, again, focused on Asia and China. If you look at the cheese and dairy consumption in China, it's still at a pretty low level versus other markets, Aidan. So in fact, we would see the Asian market and Chinese market as still having plenty of upside, albeit the world has changed. But the world changing is really about us just taking a different perspective on what consumers are looking for in this new world. But again, you know, back to even the point of, you know, immunity and health benefits and you know, the halo effect that and the reality of all that good that comes from dairy and cheese. So look, I would say we see the Asian market as being still relatively at an early stage of the maturity consumption phase from a dairy and a cheese perspective. So we see much more opportunity than we do see threats at this point.
Good. I have a question from Ronan Haughey now, one of our participants this morning. And his question is, given the vibrancy of the food and higher education sectors activity between our two countries, what is the view of the panel on collaborative opportunities for these two important sectors within the China-Ireland context? And of course, we can only address the food collaboration here. What are the opportunities for the food sector for collaboration, Ireland and China? Maybe taking a global perspective, Brittany, I'll come back to you. You have an attaché in Beijing for quite some time now, so you have a good overview of the Irish-China relationship, particularly in regard to agri-food.
Yes, well, I don't think anything beats boots on the ground. I mean, I did 2 periods abroad myself as an attaché, and that's where, and Eilish was referring to this earlier, the importance of face-to-face contacts. You know, it's key. And I think also, if you look at the way trade is going for the foreseeable future, trade deals will be bilateral. Multilateralism is out the window for now. And I think we need to get smarter in terms of how we cooperate between the different partners to an FTA. We tend to be very defensive in Ireland because we see the EU situation, but in fact the future is as much outside the EU, because I remember when an ambassador was appointed to lead the World Trade Talks in 2003 from New Zealand, the best trade negotiators in the world, by the way, a guy called Tim Grosser, who went on to become the trade minister, and he was asked what did he see as his job, and he said, my job is to put the people with the people together with the people with the money. And I think that's what we need to be doing. I mean, for example, I would love to see the circumstances come into existence where the EU and China could commence in earnest free trade agreement negotiations. And I think that's where industry will have to become much more proactive in working both with the state and also then with the different stakeholders. The only stakeholders I have seen for 6 years when I was in Geneva and the last 6 years in Brussels were primarily, and Jason's company are one good example of people who did come out to find out what was happening regulatory-wise and politically-wise. We need to get much more buy-in early on in these trade negotiations, because that's where the opportunities to grow markets are most evident. I mean, you know, we have the deal with Japan, with Mercosur, which let's see if it's ratified by member states' parliaments or not, but they are the engine for growth internationally.
Very good. Eilish, do you have any comment to make in regard to that issue of collaboration between Ireland and China? Clearly, personal relationships have always been very important in terms of businesses cultivating business in China. And this has been a very difficult period to get over that. I know you have addressed it earlier on, but what advice would you give in terms of how collaborative initiatives can be advanced in this climate?
Absolutely, Aidan. And, as I said earlier, and as Brittany said there, you can't beat the face-to-face, but in the absence of face-to-face, my advice to companies always would be to just keep up those relationships, in whatever means that you can. In China, as I mentioned earlier, because it's such a digitally focused market, it's perhaps a bit easier than in other markets. That doesn't mean that you can be complacent about it. We really have to put that emphasis on the collaboration. And, sometimes when we're in a crisis, as we've been in for the last number of months with COVID, it's a really good time to build that relationship with the customer, for example. So, to demonstrate to them that we're in this together and that we really are true partners with you and we want to find a solution. And, I think that if you look at the food service channel we were mentioning there earlier in the conversation, I think that's another very good example of it, where, it was just decimated at the height of the crisis. Now in China, it's come back about 80%. And I think, again, for the rest of the world, I think that's a real light for us to look at. And we found that in getting it back, we worked really closely with our customers. We were working with chefs. We were trying to support them in their, crisis point, in their hour of need. And I think that really tells then afterwards in the relationship. And so for companies, I think if you do put that effort in, and if you do invest in those collaborations, then that really does bring its own reward. And, that will be telling for a long time afterwards. And, the collaboration is also about with industry sectors. So we do a lot of work at our Shanghai office. There's a lot of work with the Dairy Industry Association, for example, in China. And those kind of collaborations as well work really well. And I know Brittany mentioned, and we heard yesterday from Ambassador O'Leary, all of the government collaborations. Again, when you take all that together, I think that really shows its strength and it really works.
And indeed, Professor Song, I suspect you can build on what Brittany and Ailish have been saying in regard to collaboration between research institutes, and your Tagaska and associated agencies in China. Can you tell us about what you believe are the opportunities for collaboration that we might continue to build on or explore?
Yeah, that's a good point, I think. Actually, I would like to add one comment in terms of education and research collaboration between these two countries. Actually, looking at the education, now looking at the different situation between China and Ireland, it would be very good if we can build up a joint program between China and Ireland in terms of the, for example, food program education. So this, in that way, we can educate those students or researchers and learn from both sides. I know, in Ireland, we have our very strong strengths. Yeah, and in China, they also have their own, but sometimes in terms of marketing, education, those things, we might not be good, have a clear picture on the Chinese side. So by joining these two sides together within one education program, that might help to develop this program in a proper way. In terms of joint research, that's also quite similar way. For example, we are very good with the support from our Irish government. We are very develop some new tech in the technology side, but China, they have their own also advantage. So if two sides can join together, this definitely will help us to to get this joint program go very smoothly. That definitely will be an advantage.
Thank you. And to verify just what you've been saying, just as you were speaking, a question came in from Colin Bloggs saying that food and education relations with China are being developed by Professor Song, by you. So obviously this is well recognized. And the questioner also, although I think it's a comment more than a question, remarks that UCC and UCD lead the world in food science and both have strong relationships with China as well. So there's good institutional collaboration clearly well underway and being built on, just as you described there. At an industry practitioner level, Jason, it must be frustrating that the restrictions on travel prevent you from perhaps undertaking the amount of relationship building that you would otherwise ordinarily conduct. How have you been dealing with this over the last 9 months?
Yeah, look, obviously, like many other industries, look, it certainly has been challenging. I think, look, timing is everything. We were lucky in some regards because we've been kind of working hard over the last number of years, and the very positive thing is our team in China established probably for the last 12 months, so they're on the ground, and so that's actually, we found that to be tremendous. I mean, obviously, look, we've done everything else in terms of virtual training and engagement with customers virtually. We've even had some quality audits virtually and so on to Asia. So we've all had to get very creative and be very progressive. But it's just been harder than you'd expect. But, you know, it's amazing. I think, you know, people on all sides of the world rally together and try to be creative. So look, it does go back to that kind of partnership word. If you're working with the right people, you tend to make it happen. And we have the right people on the ground, and the right people here to make sure that everybody's just working towards the same goal. So look, it's been tough, but you know what? Business has continued, and you look, you know, first and foremost, obviously, it's about the safety of people, and that's what we've been focused on. And thankfully, that's all been good, and we've managed, probably just at a slower pace, but we've managed to continue to develop our relationships and our business in Asia.
Yes, good. We've just had another question in regard to a very difficult question. The agri-food sector, like all others, has been totally disrupted. How is this going to look in 5 years' time? I'm not sure that anybody can answer that right now, but we have to take some stab at it, no matter how dark it might be. Ask all of you as to what you think are the things that are happening at the moment that are perhaps more likely than not to become part of the new normal. Beginning with you, Breffney.
Well, I think the first thing we need to say is that the world's population is continuing to grow, and it will require to be fed. We may face logistical challenges in the short term, but I think in the longer run, the key will be for consumers, and an increasingly globally better educated, informed, and incomized consumer will be safety and sustainability of food. I mean, I remember, for example, with China at one stage, as I understood it back in the 1990s when I was in Geneva at the WTO, the key for China was the aspiration food security, which was self-sufficiency. It seems to me now that the aspiration is food security, as in security of supply. I mean, people at the end of the day, and I think this has been a theme throughout this morning, people do business with people they trust. And I think that's what, for me, as an administrator, I have to make sure that people, when they want to do business with Ireland, that they know, well, that underpinning this is an administrative veterinary system that guarantees that what they buy is safe. And that's something that we will not cut corners on. Even if we have to make disproportionate investments in the short term, giving the state of the National Exchequer, we will continue to do so because it's a long-term investment for us.
The fundamental things remain fundamental and will do so into the next 5 years. Ailish, how would you build on that?
Yes, I would say that COVID really has been an accelerator. So I think that some of the trends that were perhaps already there, it has accelerated those trends. I would see that in 5 years' time, like Breffney, I would be really confident. I think, as he said, you know, we have a world where the population is growing and needs to be fed. I think that the whole area of safety and sustainability is going to become even more important for consumers. As I said earlier, I think that really plays to Ireland's strength. I think the area of premium is also going to be much more to the fore for people, for consumers generally. And I think we are going to have to more than ever be very targeted in terms of food. We're going to have to really approach the market, to cater for that individual consumer need. It'll certainly be much more about niche. That's something that I think is going to be here to stay. So the more insight we have, I think, is going to be all the more valuable. We really need to be very in tune with what consumer behaviors and consumers' attitudes are, and being able to be agile and to adapt to that very easily. So that's how I see the food world evolving in the next 5 to 10 years.
David, safety and sustainability. There's 10 billion people in the world ahead of us, around 2050 or so. And the importance, as Eilish speaks about, targeting carefully, and the million niches that your colleague in Proudfoot spoke about, the million niches, we can only target some of them. How would you see the future developing beyond that?
Sure, and apologies for the dog barking. She obviously didn't agree with what I was saying the last time. I think the one point I'd make, in addition to the points that have been made previously, would be around technology. I think we're seeing very, very significant investment in technology by global funds. I think people would generally accept that agriculture, if you go back maybe a bit the step before agribusiness, has been underserved by technology. And I think there's going to be very significant change over the next 5 to 10 years that we probably can't really envisage now. We see a lot of it already in terms of robotics. We see it in terms of drones, precision agriculture, measurement of everything from water to runoff to, you name it, and harvesting that data, processing that data and using it to improve outcomes is really going to be something that's hugely important over the next number of years. As Breffney said, there's a huge number of people that need to be fed. And resources are under strain. So the use of those resources and the very precise use of those resources is going to be incredibly important. So I see huge developments backed by global industry funding to make big changes in agriculture over the years ahead.
Very good, Jason. You are running a very highly regarded business, doing the right thing, investing strongly in sustainability, ambitious about the future. What do you see as the disruptors or the outcome of the current disruption that's taking place?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously we've got significant challenges as a business and as a sector. Just if you look at Brexit and the kind of nationalist trade agenda that's happening, be it in the US and anywhere else. So certainly there are short-term challenges. But look, I am maybe a glass of milk half full kind of guy of I think, I think longer term, the dynamics that are out there and the opportunity that is out there far outweighs the short-term challenges. And, when we think about it, we think about, again, the demographic changes, the world's population keeps growing. The consumers are becoming more educated. Again, even through COVID, people are thinking about immunity and thinking about what food does for their immunity. So we would see all of those things as being a positive in terms of our focus on good, reliable, sustainable sources of food with food technology underpinning those in terms of science around our nutritional products or dairy products. So again, I think longer term, the short-term challenges just create us maybe to get focused on the longer term.
Excellent. Professor Song, you have the last word. We're just coming to the end of our session. Just a very brief word on the future.
Yeah, brief word on the future in terms of collaboration issues. Actually, this is exactly the win-win situation. So really depending on how we promote this kind of things, so that I'm pretty confident on this kind of collaboration issue.
An excellent way to finish. Thank you to all of our panelists, to Breffney, to Eilish, to David, to Jason, and to Professor Song. Thank you for participating with us, for joining us this morning, and for your invaluable insights. And thank you to all who have been watching and listening in this morning. We've just reached the end of our session, so I pass you back to the organisers.